Love the film. Congrats on it. And
Thank you.
Alexandra, I'm a huge fan of yours. And
I'm a huge fan of yours too.
first off, I thought the film functioned great as an intro to feminist sort of horror while also digging deep enough for those familiar with your writings on the subject to sort of enjoy it as well. So the original tome was more of a reference book. How did you figure out the format you have where Alexandra, you sort of guide us through this journey, film by film, theme by theme? I love how you sort of set the more playful but introspective tone right out of the gate, and that had me howling, I'll tell you that much.
Look, the whole process was really collaborative with Donna. So one of the first questions that we really had was how do we take the kind of essence of the book, which is like an encyclopedia, it's like an A to Z, short little bios. Like that's obviously not going to work in a documentary. How do we take the essence of that and apply it to a feature-length documentary? And I think we make this quite explicit at the end of the film. But for us, the point was that the title 1000 Women in Horror was a provocation in that we really wanted people to finish both the book and the documentary. It's like, well, of course there's more than 1,000 women in horror. So we had to sort of think of a creative way, like how do we get to that same point, but in a different format? And thankfully, Donna's expertise and her creativity and her intelligence and her kindness really allowed me space to kind of collaboratively shape that with her.
I'm not going to say you weren't reluctant to be the on camera for the whole thing, though, Alex. You didn't exactly jump up and say, hey.
I didn't want it to be like one woman in horror.
No, but I think
that'd be
you
weird.
do a great job at carrying that conversation and sort of keeping us going through it.
I think I'm almost like a kind of tour guide.
Exactly. So I also dug that you recruited some of my favorite female writers and directors, like the recently turned director Kayla Janice as a panelist. Was there any sort of people that you wanted to get that you didn't get, or the timing just didn't work, or... None
that I can think of. There was discussion about location, so it was very location specific. So Maddie Doe was the only person that we filmed in Laos, but there was no question that Maddie had to be in the documentary. But most other people that we interviewed, we had like quite a few people in the one location. So there was a little bit of juggling with that stuff. But I think that my memory of this, Donna, correct me if I'm wrong, but was just like a constant squeals of delight. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe Kate Siegel's going to do this. Oh my God, I can't believe Kayla Janice is going to do this. Oh my God, I can't believe Nikki Yatujusu is going to do this. So Akella Cooper, I think I did cartwheels when I found out that we had Akella Cooper. It's like, oh my God, it's Akella Cooper. Like just fangirl bullshit.
Yeah, no, it actually was pretty smooth in terms of people agreeing. And especially if you could, in our letters to people, we'd say who's in. Once they knew someone else was in, that usually because they're all friends or they know each other or whatnot. And there were big chunks of people that all knew each other as well. And I think that it's a small world in the female horror genre space. And so we felt very fortunate that people's availability worked out. Yeah, I can't think of anyone that was on the hit list that we didn't eventually nail down. Yeah.
Well, I love the choices for the films here you cover, especially bringing April Wolf, who wrote 2019's Black Christmas, which I feel is vastly underrated. I'm still praying for that able R-rated version.
Yeah, you're speaking my language here.
I bother her on X or Twitter or Blue Sky at least once a week about it. I'm like, when are we getting that cut? At least put the script out there so I can see what really happened.
Yeah, really.
And you also have some hidden gems in there. So what was the curation process like for what films to include in the doc? Like what you wanted to highlight and what you didn't?
We had tentpole films. So they were obviously big films that had to have a kind of serious, we're going to be in trouble if we don't have these kind of 10 big films in there. And I think aside from that, it was really we wanted to color it with a kind of an array of lesser known films, some films that people just won't know at all unless they're you're quite specifically into women directed horror. I think we were going for sort of, use these big famous films that people recognize and then sort of almost use them as a Christmas tree to hang these lesser known films off. Is that correct, Donna? It's been a while, so your memory is probably...
that's a really good way to describe it. Right from the very beginning, when we knew that we were going to break the film down into the stages of a woman's life, then we knew, we kind of all agreed together which were the most important films that spoke that theme. Then after that, it was a matter of, because Alex knows every film in the world, and then Giles Edwards, who is the other producer on the film, they both know a lot more films than I do. So then it was a matter of how obscure are we going to go? Because they could have gone all day on films no one ever heard of, and that was super cool for me because I actually discovered a few films I didn't know. But I think we had to come to a sort of a fine line of these are the most sort of known, so it will, the audience will get it. And then these ones are kind of not that well known, but look at these really cool ones that maybe people don't know at all. Let's always put an Easter egg of a few of those in there. So it became really fun, but it was like a giant jigsaw puzzle for sure. And there's several hundred films. There's drives of films. There's films every night that Alex would say, watch this one. I just sent you another one. And, my head's exploding with films and the whole thing.
Gotta do a shout out for The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane. That was cool seeing that in there because I just saw that on 35 last year, and it's crazy, but it's one of those weird little Jodie Foster gems that, I can't believe Martin Sheen did that, but it's a great film. But yeah, I love how you broke it up by the stages of a woman's life. It seemed to be like one of those things where anybody could sort of come into it, like anybody could relate to it, which I think is important, especially like you'd have me speaking as a cis white man, you just have a white man sit down and they're like, oh, wow, I get this. And I thought that was a really, especially when you start out with the section when the panelists sort of talk about what made them horror fans was super interesting because you dig into that nostalgia, which is a cornerstone of horror culture. And it felt like those moments of shared discovery were meant to sort of invite the viewer into the conversation. Was that always sort of part of that? And was that meant to sort of do that, function as that, to sort of like draw folks in? Because I felt like that sort of brought everybody in the way you structured the film by the woman's life.
Yeah, I feel, having done a lot of films about the horror genre, whether it's in the female side or the male side, people that love horror have an initiation, out-of-body experience, usually in childhood at a certain point, and it's where the film affects you in a profound way. And when people express those kinds of moments, it's ubiquitous, and therefore all people can lean into that feeling because it really is like, it's kind of like the first sexual experience or the first it's a big thing when you get shocked and overwhelmed by sentiment of fear, which is similar to a lot of other innate human important sentiments. Fight or flight is one of the first, things people are going to learn. So, but it's addictive. And I think that when you can find those kind of moments, maybe you can take some people that aren't horror fans, because I've spent my whole life being ostracized even in the documentary side by people that think my stuff's not important because it's not about, saving the world or whatever people make films about, the forests or the rainforest or whatever. And that's all good. But because it's not, I feel that if you can have those kind of little moments in your documentary to pull people in, maybe you can profoundly change the mind of someone thinks it's not important and why it is important to some people. And it maybe gets some more people to take it seriously. And I think that it sort of felt that way in the cinema when we attended some of the screenings.
And I think what those stories allow us to do is it really emphasizes the humanity of horror. And I think about some of my favorite horror documentaries, things like Kayla Janice's Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, things like horror noir. They do the same thing. There's a real emphasis on the connection between horror and humanity. Like as human beings, like what does humanity mean to us? Like where is our compassion? Where is our humanity? And I think that that's a conversation that's sometimes a little hard to have. And it is an easier conversation to broach through the personal rather than the theoretical.
No, you brought up horror noir, and I was just wondering, are there any plans to possibly turn this into a series? Because I could figure every stage is like an episode, and you could just like further granularly dig into the details of all these different sub genres. And I know Shudder likes to do that.
Well, we started out looking at it as a series, actually. We originally were speaking to Shudder about the possibility of doing a very limited series with it, but it ended up, the pandemic came and all kinds of things happened. So we ended up going in this direction. But I do feel that for the savvy broadcaster out there who's listening, there's definitely enough meat on the, in the...
Call me.
Please.
There's a lot. There's a lot to be said. And, the great thing about this kind of thing is it's not expensive to do, broadcasters out there, because, when you're using film clips with a film critic discussing a clip, then it's usable, fair use and all those kinds of things. So it's just, there's so much possibility. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. A lot of people would love to see something in even more depth with the subject matter.
Now, my final question is for you, Donna. You did another doc on women in horror, Pretty Bloody.
Yeah.
Do you think the horror community has begun to do a better job supporting feminist voices since your last doc? And what can we do to be better as horror fans?
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of renewed or I guess completely new interest in knowing that horror can sell and that it can be sold internationally, and that women make films that do sell. And I think that in the past, people were a little afraid of that. They thought it just had to be a guy straight out of film school with a camera that could make those kind of films. But now they realize that, with the woman winning the Palme d'Or and with, the interest in recently in female-generated horror selling well, that's an opportunity. In 2009, when I did Pretty Bloody, that wasn't the case yet, so it wasn't quite as strong. So I do feel things that have advanced to a certain degree, and I think that there's still a way to go, and that means putting more control into the hands of producers of other specifications in terms of not making the same people make all the decisions, because I think that where things get exciting is when you see these films and these young and new filmmakers that are coming on the scene, making things that are unbelievable with their very limited resources. Can you imagine if they had the budgets of some of these giant studios to make a film? I think there's
Right.
money in their hills for anyone that's listening, and I think that when people start to see that, and they are, things are changing a little. Yeah.
She's not a horror filmmaker per se, but she's a big horror fan. But somebody like Louise Weird and her
Oh,
castration movie series, like she's completely rewriting the grammar of cinema, which is having such an enormous response, not just from trans audiences, but from audiences across the board. And it's like Louise is the most exciting filmmaker working today, full stop. And it's like, imagine living in a world where Louise got funding. Like,
I mean, hopefully we're making progress, but, we can always do better.
we're making some progress, and that's wonderful. It definitely is a bit of a different world than it was in 2009, but we've still got a ways to go, and I think it's exciting. I think it's the most exciting time ever in the history of filmmaking to start to see other voices get a chance to make films, and those films are, changing the world really in many ways. So it's really exciting. It's the best time ever to be a filmmaker and a horror fan.
My time is up. Thank you, ladies, very much for giving me some of your time and chatting with me. And once again, thanks for the film. I really, really enjoyed it.